When you use the restroom and flush the toilet, have you ever wondered how life was like before the toilet? How waste was managed back then? Imagine walking through a city at night, no streetlights, no plumbing, and beneath your feet or sometimes right outside your door sits human waste piling up. Now imagine if your job was to go around collecting it by hand. In the 19th century, long before modern sewage systems, cities had a massive growing problem. What do we do with all this human waste? They did not have flush toilets like we have today. Most homes relied on privies, basically outhouses, or cesspools dug into the ground. And when those filled up, someone had to empty them. That someone was known as the night soil worker or the nightman. The term night soil was actually a polite way of saying human waste. And the night part, that's when the job was actually done. Because sometimes the cities didn't want people seeing or smelling what was being moved through the streets. So under the blanket of darkness, these workers would go from house to house, yard to yard, removing waste that had piled up sometimes for weeks or even months. Could you imagine having to do this as a job? This was not a well-respected job. In fact, it was one of the lowest status occupations in society at that time. Many night soil workers were poor, marginalized, or had no other options. In some places, it was work assigned to prisoners. In America, it was common in New York and Philadelphia, where there would be a lot of immigrants or African Americans. Their workday did not start in the morning like most people. It started late at night. While the rest of the city is asleep, they prepared tools, buckets, shovels, sometimes carts or barrels mounted on wheels, and then they went out at dark. When they arrived at a property, they would locate the privy or the cesspit. Sometimes it was in the backyard, sometimes beneath the house. Every home had something similar to a cesspit, a deep hole beneath the house where waste was collected. Over time it filled, and when it did, the night soil men would be called in. They would arrive after dark carrying buckets, shovels, and lanterns so they can see. Then they would climb down the pit and begin digging by hand, using shovels and scoops. They would transfer the contents into buckets or barrels. The smell was overwhelming. We're talking about waste that had been sitting and fermenting, sometimes mixed with rainwater or garbage. It wasn't just solid waste, it was often a thick, toxic sludge. There were no gloves, there were no PPE or protective gear, no sanitation standards like we think of today. Workers were exposed to bacteria, parasites, disease, toxic gases like methane. In some cases, workers would pass out from the fumes while cleaning the deep cesspits. And if they fell in, it could have been fatal. This was a dangerous, physically exhausting, and incredibly unpleasant work. How did they transport the waste? Once collected, the waste had to be transported. Workers would load barrels onto carts, move them through the streets at night. But sometimes people still would know because of the smell. Cities would often have strict rules about when and how the night soil men could be moved to avoid public outrage. Spills were a constant risk, and when they happened, they were not an easy cleanup. You might think that the waste was just dumped somewhere far off away from the city, but interestingly enough, it was reused. In many areas, night soil men would also take the waste and sell it as fertilizer to farmers. They would buy it to enrich their soil. So in a strange way, this unpleasant job played a key role in agriculture. It connected the waste of cities to the food production of the countryside. Despite how essential their work was, night soil workers were looked down upon. People avoided them like leopards. They were associated with filth, disease, and poverty, even though without them, cities wouldn't have been unlivable. Waste would pile up, disease would spread even faster. In many ways, they were the invisible heroes, doing work no one else wanted to do. And this wasn't a small issue. Cities in the 1800s were growing rapidly. More people meant more waste. The big cities with nightmen workers were Philadelphia and New York in America. And without proper systems in place, a public health crisis arose. Overflowing cesspits, contaminated water, the spread of disease. Night soil workers were on the front lines of this problem, trying to keep up with a system that was quickly becoming unsustainable. Eventually, cities began to modernize, sewer systems were developed, indoor plumbing became more common, flush toilets changed everything. Instead of manually removing waste, flush toilets allowed water to carry the waste through underground pipes, and slowly the need for night soil workers declined. For decades, even centuries, these workers were absolutely essential. They kept cities functioning, they reduced waste buildup, they played a role in preventing outbreaks and epidemics. And yet their story is rarely told. It's easy to forget how different life was before modern sanitation. We take for granted what happens when we flush the toilet, but in the 19th century, that simple act did not exist. Instead, it relied on real people, working in the dark, doing one of the hardest, most overlooked jobs at that time, the nightmen, a job no one wanted, but one society couldn't live without. Until next time, see you in the next video.